Hi, this is Musa. I want to show you today's games between Pavel Eljanov and Sergey Kajakin. The two players have been drawing each other's in the past two games, which are classical games. Now they've switched to rapid, and this is the first rapid game where Eljanov had the white pieces and started a ready opening against Kajakin. And after e5 we have e4 here, bishop e7, knight c3, and we can see the choices for black: open the flanks or castle. He chose d6 among them all, and d3. Here black's ideas are to play his bishop to e6, pretty much control both sides of the boards, but he rather castled. Now the ideas are obvious for White wants unchallenged knight on d5. However, it's not available at the moment. Maybe bishop g5 takes the knight, then plays his knight to d5. However, he started some queenside control over b5, preventing black from expanding with b5 himself. And Kajakin here started to control or put a grab on the d5 square, forbidding white from doing so for the moment. And now Pavel switches with knight to d2. His ideas are basically play his knights to c4 and b5, attack d6, and if d5 was played, then the e5 pawn is free. However, he also has ideas to block the bishop attack on g4. This will affect the dark square diagonal from a7 to g1 in the future, but now Kajakin realizes that he has to prevent bishop g5 after white plays his knight to c4. So he plays h6, important move, and now knight to c4. Bishop to g4. White could have played f3, but he chose a better move or a similar move in quality, which is queen to d2. Now the bishop done his job, came back to d7. White has many ideas here. One of them is b3, fianchetto the bishop on b2 and attack the long diagonal. However, the idea behind bishop getting back to d7 from black side is that black might think about playing b5 himself, either by preparing rook to b8 or preparing immediate b5 if knight jumps from c3 to d5 immediately. However, white ignores that idea and plays his knight to d1, maybe having ideas of playing c3. Rook to e8 now, and maybe this bad bishop on e7 will switch to f8 and control some dark squares on g7, or defend the king simply. Now knight goes back to the game with knight de3, and maybe black here should have just challenged that knight immediately, but he rather played bishop to f8, and now c3 attacks the knight. Knight goes back to c6 and f4. Pavel Eljanov wants to open the f file and start a kingside attack. Let's see if he succeeds. E takes f4. Black wasn't in need to take the f4 pawn, but he chose to accept that challenge. G takes, also rook takes is possible at this position, and now bishop to e6 pretty much attacks the knight. And of course, this is extra control on d5 square. Queen to f2 switches to the king side, and maybe having ideas to push f5 next. But Kajakin immediately takes the knight, and now knight takes knight and d5, and this is the idea behind taking the knight. Now white immediately took on d5. This is even clearing the area even more for his pieces to gather up at the king side. However, another move is possible, which is knight to e5. Knight to e5 will lead to a crazy game, and that is d takes e4, d takes e4, knight takes e5, f takes e5, and now if rook takes e5, then bishop to f4, and bishop attacks the rook, and the h6, the knight will be under pressure from the queen on f2 and the rook on f1. So maybe the possible, the most applicable idea would be to take on e4. After bishop takes, knight takes, attacks the queen, queen attacks the knight, and queen to d5 to defend. Rook a d1, queen c6, and maybe now bishop takes, the pawn is pinned. Now rook to e8 to defend the knight, so the queen is ready to take, but after bishop to e3, the game is about equal, even though I like white in this position. However, after d5 from black, we had e takes d5 immediately, knight takes d5, and now white has many ideas. Take the knight immediately or push f5, bishop will take on h6 after queen goes to g3. But maybe Eljanov was thinking about just connecting his rooks, so he plays bishop to d2, and it's a good move. Now knight goes back to defend his king, and queen to f3, maybe trying to control the g4 square from the knight annoying attacks. Now this is the critical move of the game. Kajakin plays knight to a5. If knight takes knight, which did not happen in the game, then queen takes. Now if white thinks that he can take on b7, then he is wrong. After rook a b8, queen must go to f3, go back to f3, and after rook takes b2, bishop is attacked, c3 is attacked. If the a rook goes to defend the bishop, then the a4 is attacked and might be taken. So after knight to a5, what's the solution? Pavel switches to e5 with his knight, and now he's gonna start an unstoppable attack. Kajakin stubbornly attacked the queen side. Perhaps he has no good moves for the moment. He wants to collect that b pawn, and Eljanov defended. Rook a d8, activity and control, and now of course king to h1. You've probably been wondering if king should have moved before the rook moved, but it was harmless. For now, extra precaution, king moves to h1 because of the c5 advance or c4 advance, and now queen to b3. Theoretically it's a good move. It's gonna collect the a4 pawn, maybe plays to c2 later on, attacks the bishop, annoy white, and maybe cause some problems with coordination for white. However, white is focusing on his king side attack, and the idea behind this, behind bishop to un, is that he's gonna play bishop to h4 and eliminate that defensive knight. Queen takes f4 or a4, and bishop to h4. Rook d6 to defend the knight, and rook to a1, and we see that black is about to lose his knight, if not his queen. After queen b5, maybe c4, and of course the queen cannot go to either of these squares, which is c6 and d7, or even white can eliminate the knight and then control these squares freely before playing c4. Now if queen to b5 and c4 and the queen took on b2, then it's obvious the knight is lost. So Kajakin, after b5, we indeed have c4. Queen cannot take the pawn and lose the knight, so queen to a6 only move, and it's very passive move. For the attack on the a4 pawn, now black is limited and white has the initiative. And this is one of the most important moves in the game. Remember, this is a rapid game, and the idea behind this is that white is attacking this pawn which control the b4 square, and if pawn takes now, then b4 and the knight is cooked, so rook must take. And white could have taken the knight immediately, but he rather chose a simplified variation, which is queen to c3. Queen will attack the rook after playing b4. If pawn takes, then the rook is gone, and queen also attacks the knight with the rook in case black plays b6, for example. However, black will not stay watching. Black plays immediately knight to e4. The idea behind this is that now the queen is attacked, so white must be fast. He could choose to take the knight on a5 or just take the knight on e4 immediately. Taking the knight on e4 is a proper approach to this, but Eljanov is in a hurry to simplify the game, and indeed he is winning. After black taking on the pawn on a4, white is winning. So queen takes, simplifying the game more. After rook takes, knight to d2, and this is another inaccuracy from Kajakin. Rook to d1 pins the knight, almost pins the knight, and bishop to d6 attacking the knight, so the black knight will go to c4 after bishop takes on e5. But now bishop goes back to f2, and where is the rook going? Bishop takes e5, and instead of taking the rook, he took first on e5 with the pawn, so f takes e5. Let's see, bishop takes d4. Then this is perhaps a bad move. Then bishop takes d4, and the knight cannot be taken because of the rook e1 check, collecting the bishop pretty much. However, white chose the better move, which is f takes e5, and now knight takes c4, and white takes with the bishop, and of course this is giving black the other rook on a5. Bishop c3 attacks the knight, knight to c4, and now he can take on b7 freely, but he rather played e6. If the pawn takes, then rook goes to d7, attacks g7, and black king has no defense at all. So Kajakin took with the rook, and this is causing a bigger problem even. This is check on d8 after king to h7, bishop d5, and Kajakin resigned. This is the first rapid game. We will see the second game in a while, and I'm gonna be showing you guys how the second game went. Until then, bye for now.